In this video, we're going to cover how to set up and start using the shader graph. This is a very powerful Unity tool that lets you easily make some really cool shaders by dragging and dropping various nodes and simply connecting the dots. Let's begin! Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey, and this channel is all about helping you learn how to make your own games with in-depth tutorials made by a professional indie game developer. So if you find the video helpful, consider subscribing. Okay, so let's check out shader graph in Unity. This is an extremely powerful and very easy to use feature. I've already done a bunch of different shader graph effects in previous videos. There's a playlist linked in the description, and I also covered how you can apply shader graph shaders as a post-processing effect. So after watching this beginner video, go check those out to see some more concrete examples. Now here we're going to go through the setup process to be able to start using shader graph. Then we're going to look at the basics for how it works, how we can add properties to our shader, understand how the board works, add nodes and connect them to make our effects. The process is the same for making 3D and 2D shaders with just the output node being different. And lastly, in the end, we're also going to see how you can manipulate our shaders through code. This video is made possible thanks to these awesome supporters. Go to patreon.com/unitycodemonkey to get some perks and help keep the videos free for everyone. Okay, so let's begin. Now, first of all, in order to use shader graph, you need to be using one of the new render pipelines. So that's the high definition render pipeline or the universal render pipeline. The shader graph does not work on the old built-in render pipeline. So over here, I have a completely empty project. So right now it is not using any of the render pipelines. So let's install that quickly. We just go into Window and open up the package manager. And now here we see tons of available packages. So here we want to find the universal render pipeline. All right, here it is. So just hit on download and then install. All right, it's installed. And over here, we can also see the shader graph package and make sure that it has been automatically installed as soon as we install the universal render pipeline. Okay, so now that it's installed, we can go into edit and go down here to the project settings. And then we have the graphics tab. And here we can see a field for a render pipeline asset. So down here in my project files, just right click and we're going to create, go into rendering, universal render pipeline, and create a new pipeline asset. So just like that, hit enter and there you go. So now we can simply drag it onto that field and yep, just like that. Okay, so now our project is using the universal render pipeline. All right, so with the render pipeline setup, we can start playing around with shader graph. Now to do that, we just right click, then we go into create, and over here we have shaders. And then over here we have the various shader graphs. So you have a basic unlit graph, which does not receive light. You have a PBR, which receives physically accurate light. Then we have a subgraph, which is more complex if you want to compose it of various subgraphs. And the VFX shader graph, which is meant to be used with the visual effects graph. Then you also have the 2D renderer for some basic 2D graphs. Okay, so in this case, let's select a basic PBR graph. Let's call it testing shader graph. All right, here's the asset and just double click to open it. All right, so here we see the shader graph window. So the first thing you see here is this node. Now this is our master node, which is essentially our output. And here in the corner, we can see a preview. So right now it just shows the default sphere. And we can right click to change the preview mesh. So in this case, let's select the cube just for testing. And there you go, we have our basic cube. So let's try out using this completely empty shader. Now to save, we go up here on the left side and click on Save Asset. There you go, it's been saved. And now down here in our project files, let's right click to create a new material. All right, here's our new material. And now over here we can change the shader, so just click on it and we go down into the folder called Shader Graphs. And then inside we have all of the shader graphs that were made with shader graph. So here, let's select our custom one. And yep, there it is. Now we have this material. So now just for testing, let's go to our scene, and in here, let's create a new 3D object, make it a cube, and just drag our material onto it. And yep, here we have our very basic cube using our custom shader made in shader graph. Right, awesome. Okay, so now having this basic cube isn't really very interesting. So let's go back into shader graph. Okay, here we are. Now just a simple note on a very useful hotkey, which is you press Shift and Space and it automatically maximizes the window that you're using. So in here, just select shader graph, Shift and Space, and there you go, we have a very nice window that we can work with. Okay, now up here on the left side, we have the properties area. So this is where we can add properties that our shader requires. Over here, we can click on the plus icon and we can see the various types that we can create. So in this case, let's select a simple type texture 2D. And just like that, our shader now has a property. And here we see the various fields related to this property. Now the property has a name and a reference. So the name is up here and we can double click to rename it. So in this case, let's call it main text. And then over here we have the reference name. So in this one, we're going to call it underscore main text. The reference is the name we're going to use if we want to modify shader properties through code. And normally they start with an underscore. And the name has to exactly match what you write in code and what you write in here. So be careful with how it's case sensitive. All right, so we have our basic texture property. Now if we just save our asset and now select our material and look in the inspector, and yep, over here we can see we have a nice texture field. So I can click on this and yep, there you go, I can select any texture. So if I select the texture, let's say this nice one, and go into the scene view, and nope, our cube is still showing the same basic gray cube. So we set a texture, but it's currently not yet being applied. So let's go back into shader graph. And now here we can take this texture and just click and drag and drop it straight into our board. And over here we have our main texture node. Now we want to apply this to our master node here so we can visually see the texture. So in order to affect the color, what we need to modify is over here the albedo. So you really just need to connect the dots. However, if I try to grab this one and try to connect it to that one, and nope, you can see that it does not accept it. Now here inside parentheses, we can see the type for each input and output. And over here, you can see that the input for this one, it shows a 3, which means that it's expecting a RGB color value. But over here on the texture, it's outputting a T2, which is a 2D texture. So in this case, it means that we need to sample the texture to get the color values, which we can then use in here. Now, in order to add a node onto our board, we can right click in here, then go into create node. And over here we have our nodes. Now in here you can browse around and see all of the various nodes that are available. So in this case we can go over here to input, go into texture, and over here we have the sample texture 2D. So that's one way that we can get this. Or another way is simply over here in the middle of nothing, I click on space and then I write sample, and over here I find the texture. So just a quick way of adding nodes by using text. Okay, so now on this node, you can see that over here we have an input of type T2 and we have an output of all the colors. So very simple, over here we can just connect the dots. So just connect the T2 onto this input, and now on the output we have the RGBA, and we're going to connect it onto our albedo. Alright, so everything is nicely connected. Now we just hit on save asset, and yep, here we are in our scene, and we do indeed see our cube with our very nice texture. Alright, awesome. So just like this, we learned how to create the most basic shader. So it just has a texture and applies it to our mesh. Pretty much any effect you want to build is just extending upon this concept. So here in shader graph, another tip is how you can set the default texture. So over here you pre-select it, and now we can see our very nice preview. And then here you can simply just browse around all of the nodes. So you can see there's tons of nodes, tons of master nodes, input nodes, artistic nodes, and anything you want. Now, in order to be able to create any effect you want, you just need to start thinking in terms of colors and mathematical operations. So for example, let's make a simple tint to our texture. So let's replace this one with this one that is in black and white. And now we want to tint this with any color. Now, if you've ever used an image program, you should be familiar with the basic multiply tint. We have an image and we tint everything with a certain color. Now here we can simply add a new property. So click on the plus sign, we add a color. Let's call it color, and on the reference, call it underscore color. Now let's drag the color onto our board. Yep, there's the color. And over here, let's hit space. And we want to add a multiply node. All right, there it is. It takes one value and multiplies by another one, and we have the output. So in this case, let's take our color, and then we're going to multiply our color by our texture color. So just input that one in there. And let's change the default color. Let's put it on a nice green. Yep, just like that. And we take this output and simply put it on the albedo. And yep, over here we have a very basic tint color shader. So by modifying this property, we modify the final effect that we get down here. So again, you just need to think about this in terms of colors and math. So what we're doing here on this multiply node is you have to imagine the texture has a color value per each pixel. And then we're going through each pixel one by one, and we're multiplying it by our color constant. So it multiplies the red and green and blue and so on. And then we have our output. So we're working with textures, but in the end, always remember that this is really just numbers. All right, so let's try this. Just save the asset. And yep, back in the scene here, and we have our material, and yep, we have a field for our color property. And we can select, and now we can tint this. So let's change the texture for the gray one. And yep, there you go. Now we can tint this with any color. So you can see that all of the base pixels of the texture are being multiplied by whatever color value we use. So you can see how easy it is to build upon this to make any effect you want. It's all about placing nodes and connecting the dots. So here in the properties, you can see we have tons of fields that we can add. So for example, let's add one of type vector1, which is essentially a float. Let's call this our saturation. And again, give it a nice reference name. And over here we have the mode. We can click on this and change from default and select a slider. And now we can select a nice minimum and maximum. So in this case, let's leave it between 0 and 1. And if we save and look in the material, yep, there it is. Now over here we can see our saturation field. And yep, it's a nice slider. It goes from 0 all the way to 1. So now here, for example, let's drag it in there and let's press space and add a saturation node. And there you go, it takes an input and saturation. So for example, for the input, let's take this color. For the saturation, let's take our field and output the whole thing all the way in there. So if we save, and yep, here we are in our scene and saturation of 0, then everything is in black and white, and increase it and we get our nice color. So change the texture for this one. Use a white color so that it looks the original, and then tint it black in black and white and with color and so on. Alright, so here you can see a very nice different type of property. Alright, now just one last thing. Over here we are working with a 3D shader since we're using a PBR master. However, if you remember over here, if we hit on create shader, we can create some 2D renderer shaders. Now what this does is really just change the master node. So over here we can create a new node. Go down here to master and you can change any of the masters. For example, let's say sprite unlit, and now we can right click in order to make this the active master. And then let's change this to make it a quad. And then everything else is pretty much the same. So just take this one, take the output of that color and just drag it in there. And yep, there you go. Now we have a very simple 2D sprite. So here in the scene, let's make a new object, make it a 2D object, make it a sprite. Let's give it a basic sprite. Alright, here's our flat 2D sprite. And for the material, let's use the same material using our nice shader. And yep, there you go. Now everything is working the same. So we have a nice sprite shader being applied to our sprite render, which is using a 2D sprite. And whatever sprite you select over here on the sprite render is going to be set on the shader on the main text. So again, always be careful with the exact name. Alright, now another thing related to shaders is how you can modify them through code. So over here I have this very simple script. It just has a field for the material, and then we access that material and we set color. Then we pass in the name of the property that we want to change and then the value that we want to change it to. So in this case, when we press the T key, it's going to set the color to green. So over here I have my basic cube, and let's add this script onto it. And let's drag the reference to our material. Yep. Now let's hit play. Alright, there's the cube. Now if I press the T key, yep, there you go. It changes the property, which changes the color. So I modified the shader property through code, which modified my material. Now using this, you can build just about anything in your shaders and control them in any way you want. You can make shaders that are really simple or go really crazy and complex. The only limit is really just your imagination. Alright, so with this introductory video, you should now be able to get started making your own shaders. If you want to see some specific tutorial videos, check out the Shader Graph playlist where you can view the tutorials for various effects. I've already covered a bunch of them, like glow, blur, pixelate, and so on. And I also covered how to apply those shaders as post-processing effects. So now go ahead and make something awesome. If you found this video helpful, consider liking and subscribing. This video is made possible thanks to these awesome supporters. Go to patreon.com/UnityCodeMonkey to get some perks and help keep the videos free for everyone. As always, you can download the project files and utilities from UnityCodeMonkey.com. Subscribe to the channel for more Unity tutorials, post any questions you have in the comments, and I'll see you next time.